What's it we're doing?
And I do believe, and that'll be us live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our first main stage tasting of Whisky Show 2020. So this is the wonders of What's New, Pussycat. And so I'm joined today by three independent bottlers, people who go out there, find interesting whiskies, stick them in a bottle for you to drink. So I'm going to go around the room and I get everybody to introduce themselves and say hello. So I'm going to start with you. Cara, if you want to say hello, tell us who you are, what you do.
I can indeed. I am Cara Laing, Director of Whisky at Dougas Laing, which is an independent bottler started in 1948 by my grandpa. Very much a family business. I've got the joy and pleasure always of working with both my husband and my dad. And actually only last year we became distillers for the first time as we took ownership of Strathearn Distillery in Perth, but we very much regard ourselves still as passionate independent bottlers with a philosophy to bottle whisky the way the distiller intended, so very natural and as close as it gets to drinking a whisky straight out of the cask in a warehouse.
That's what I like to hear. So anyway, continuing around in a clockwise fashion. I have no idea what the order is for everybody else. This is clockwise for me at least. So Oliver, if you could introduce yourself and tell us who you are.
So I am Ollie Chilton and I work for Elixir Distillers, which is part of the Sukhinder Singh Empire of Doom that owns the Whisky Show, etc., etc. My job title is a holdall that does a lot of different things. I've been looking after casks for Sukhinder for the last 5-6 years.
Something like that, yeah.
I've lost track. I've worked for him for about 10, no, just under 10. And essentially we look after all the cask stock held by the parent company, so about 10,000 casks. We do exactly the same thing. We put whiskey in bottles. It's not a massively complicated process, although more complicated than I thought originally, and somewhat less romantic than I was told by Fred Laing. Beautiful thing, Cara. I can't tell you. Your dad sold it to me. It's this kind of wondrous experience, and I discovered later on that there was lots of actual work as well. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. We have several different bottlings, but our kind of mainstay label is Single Malts of Scotland, which Sukhinder started in 2002. We do a couple of different Islay bottlings, and a couple of new things where I've stolen names from Sukhinder and decided to repurpose them for my own evil means.
Excellent. Yeah, Ollie, it's about 9.5 years.
There you go, thank you, mate.
Yeah, but we started basically in about the same week in totally different parts of the company. So, yeah. Anyway, Mark, tell us all about yourself.
Yeah, well, I'm Mark Watt, director, owner of Watt Whisky. Very much it's similar to Cara Laing, family business. Just me and my wife, except our business started pretty much yesterday. We founded it December this year, and in fact, we're so new that our whiskey just hit the shops today for the first time ever. So you can't get much newer than that. Kate and my wife and I, we've been in the industry for 20 plus years and started up our own independent bottler. And the first 5 casks have just been bottled. So we're a little bit behind the other 2 in this chat, but we'll try and not let that stop us.
Yeah, well, this is we have 3 different different independent bottlers from very different sort of eras, starting at different times, and very, very excited, Mark, to finally get a chance to try your whiskies. And with that, we should probably drink some whiskey. Because even in a virtual tasting, I feel that if you're not drinking whiskey, you're doing it wrong. So,
absolutely.
Mark, over to you. Our first whiskey. Sorry, everybody who's got a tasting pack, one of these lovely things. I'll show you this one. It's empty, unfortunately, which doesn't really help because, yeah. Anyway, I may have entirely messed up the order because I can't remember what the order was in there. So I've made a different order. So I'm going to shout out what the whiskies are beforehand if you want to try along at home. If you have any questions, pop them in the chat down the side, the main stage chat. Don't stick them in the event chat because I won't see that if you do. But in the main stage, type in questions and I will jump on them as and when I can. But in the meantime, we're going to start off by drinking some Mallockmore 2008 from What Whisky. Mark, I believe this may well be. Is this the first online virtual tasting of your whiskey?
Yes, because the first time I actually got a proper bottle of our own whiskey was the one that came in the pack from you guys, and then our stock arrived last night at 5:05. So I'm still tired from carrying it all up the stairs and running around Campbelltown getting rid of it today. So this is very much the first, although you can see we're doing pretty well considering we got the bottle yesterday and the other casks. But it's all good. This is Monachmore. Being brutally honest, had I known what this was, I wouldn't have asked for a sample. This is been what we're classing rested in a brandy butt for 3 months. I don't like the word finish. And to be honest, 3 months is not a finish. It's not even a start. So that's why we're terming it as a finish. I was looking down a list of samples from a very good broker, and I was lucky that he was going to give me samples. And I was like, "Oh, Monachmore, I quite fancy a Monachmore. The price was good, etc., etc." Had I known it was only been in a brandy butt for 3 months, I probably wouldn't have got a sample. But got a sample, loved it, loved the fruitiness, the richness of it, and was like, "Right, I'll buy that." And they went, "There's a problem with that. It's not a hoggy. It's actually 2 hoggies that's been filled into a brandy butt." And again, we were thinking our first release, doing a butt, it's maybe, a bit ambitious, but we liked it. We could afford it. So we bought it. That was pretty much it. So I really like the thickness on this. It's got a lot of body to it. Obviously, like everybody, doing things the proper way, cask strength, non-chill filtered. So technically it's not a single cask, but it is a single cask, but that's a whole other argument of what is a single cask. But it came out of one single brandy butt. And I like it. It's fairly decent strength as well. 54.8. Just really rich, really full. And for me, we've got 5 casks from the first release, and probably this is the gem. There's no Monachmore collectors. Actually, that's a lie. I do know one Monachmore collector, but he's Swedish. He's probably on. But it's that's why I liked it. Being brutally honest, as a new company with limited funds, and limited history, we're a few months old. We're not going to get your Ardbegs, your Taliskers, your things like that. We just don't have access to that, and we just don't have the funds. So for me, it's always fun to find something like a Monachmore that hopefully people, when they try it, will be like, "Wow, that's changed my perception." Monachmore, everyone remembers it from Loch Dew. That's the only reason people remember Monachmore. It's probably the worst whiskey I've ever tried. Well, no, I've tried worse. But there was. No, I probably shouldn't say. But it's that's what I like. And throughout my history of working for independent bottlers, I've loved the big name whiskies, and they're easy to sell. But it's much more fun finding something like this Monachmore. I don't know what you guys think of it.
It's not what I expected at all. I was expecting on first nosing of it this sort of lighter whiskey, like that. But this has got this big sort of like boiled sweets and sort of that sort of toffee thing, and the stuff coming from the brandy cask, which I wasn't expecting in there at all. And the brandy cask has held it all together. And again, being 2 casks fatted together, you've got the different nuances of the 2 casks coming together, which sometimes can be a bit better than a single cask, if that makes sense. Yeah. Well, it fills in the gaps.
I loved it. You sent me a sample a little while ago, and I then found myself going, "Don't really know Monachmore," and then looking through stock sheets to find if we had any, and then requesting samples. Just because I did know Monachmore, absolutely stunking, and I completely agree. This was my standout track.
So I was delighted now that there was actually 663 bottles came out of this, because I'll be archiving quite a lot of this, to be honest.
I see you getting. You may have only started recently, but you understand the archiving already. That's very important. So, a quick question from Colin Hamden White over in the chat. What is the RRP on this, Mark?
I don't know. They only arrived on the Whisky Exchange today, but it's probably Everything in our range for the first 5 is going to be between 60, 65 to 80 quid. So drinking prices.
Cool. I would normally just go and have a look up on our system, but I only have one.
Yeah,
tiny
your
laptop
stock
this time,
only
so I
arrived
can't-
with you. Well, I'm hoping the stock arrived with you today, so it's not actually live yet.
No.
That's
It takes
how
a little
new
bit
it
to
is.
trickle through. But no. So yeah, a good price as well. So a couple of comments. We've got a lovely dessert whiskey from John Webb, DVD bloke online. A lovely dessert whiskey, fresh fruit and cream with sugar on top. He is pleased.
Yeah, I'll go with that. To be honest, I can't remember what nonsense I wrote. Creamy, nutty, honeycomb, and fresh ginger.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, but very much desserty, as you say. It's got that lovely richness, and the brandy casks probably added a sweetness to it, but it's not overpowered it. And now we've got an empty brandy cask that we'll probably fill with something. Well, David Stark will fill with something and then sell it back to me. But it's there's lots of things going on with this. I love the richness of the mouthfeel on this.
I'll say, even from nosing it, I found that I got some of that sweetness and that sort of extra stuff. There was still that nice crunchy spirit behind it. On the palate, that's just that big, rich, rounded thing going on. That's lovely. That. Oh, thank you very much.
On the pricing, we are like, we've got an Alton Bane coming out in 1997 in the second release, but we're probably looking to have everything that we bottle for the foreseeable future at under like 150 quid. Because I want to be able to afford to drink my own whiskey without having to cry too much. And again, just for cash flow reasons, we're not in a position to go and spend, I've been offered, and we've all been offered, ridiculous casks lately, for silly money. And it's just, it's basically $61.95 on the Whisky Exchange. That's a bargain.
Are you
Thank you
filling
very much.
anything, Mark?
What's that?
Sorry. Are you filling anything
No, not
directly
yet, not
straight
yet.
from any of the distillers?
Like, I'll be brutally honest, we own 15 casks. Oh, actually, no, we don't. We own 10 casks because we've just bottled 5 of them. So, we're very much just early stages. Looking now that we've bottled these, we'll be looking to buy probably another 10 or so. We're always going to have small scale, Unfortunately, when I was at Cadden Heads, I had Mr. Wright's money to play with. Now I've just got my own money, which is not quite
No.
substantial. But
Mark, could you
That was
show us the bottle
superb.
again? Sorry, Mark. There you go, Peter, and from the chat.
So with the labels, like the branding is a taste bud. You may have seen the T-shirt business that we created. So it's a taste bud because that's what we're all about. It's all about the taste, and the bottles are different colours labels as well. And we're doing something slightly different with that because I have a mild form of synesthesia where I smell in colours. So we're matching the label colour to what I smell. And the great thing about that is no one can tell me I'm wrong. So from when we tried to put the company together, we always said we would have one label. It'd be very simple, no boxes, nothing. And we've ended up with 5 different labels on the bottle, between the bottle and the boxes. We have 9 different taste buds with 3 different colours. So technically we've got 27 different label options. It's so everything that I said we wouldn't do finishes, wouldn't do this, wouldn't do the next thing. We've done it all in the first release. So it's amazing how your perceptions change when you get into it.
Oh, yeah. Cara, we got a question from the chat. What do you reckon?
I thought it was lovely. I've got an empty glass.
That's
Thoroughly
always a good
enjoyed
thing.
it. For me, I know what we're going on to next, but there was a bit of a grain characteristic there, lots of vanilla, a bit of hard candy. But I love natural cask strength whiskies. So for me, despite the strength, that was a great one to kick off on. I'm afraid gone are the days of reverting back to 40% strength whiskies. They just, to me, are like water.
Yeah, it's
So why
like
bother?
drinking juice, to be honest. That's what we get from a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
So this is
Obviously, I don't.
me
Dangerous.
checking all the strength of all the samples because I seem to have forgotten about strength when trying to come up with an order, which is fairly normal, but that's fine by me. Anyway, should we move on to our next whiskey then? So,
Yes, please.
Ollie, do you want to take us through your canvas?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
So
here we go. Everybody who's tasting along at home, it is this one.
yeah, I haven't got a bottle to show you because I only realised that the whiskies we selected clearly weren't in bottle when we selected them, and they only went into bottle like last week. So I can't show you the fancy labels and all of that. This is a canvas. It's in our Whiskey Trail series, which we actually started just for Asia. It was originally just in Taiwan and Japan, and mainly because I had customers by single casks, and I also had loads of grain whiskey and blends and stuff that I bought without telling Sekinder, without really thinking about how we were going to sell it. Not the smartest move at the time, but it's worked out all right. The canvas, it's a lovely whiskey. I haven't actually tried this since we did the sampling, so that will have been like 7 months ago, there that month. And I think it's exactly as Cara described before. It's all those kind of lovely vanillas, soft, creamy. Can't buy vast amounts of canvas anymore, and it's all pretty old, what with it being closed. So it's a nice whiskey to open with from us anyway. In terms of Whiskey Trail, we started doing Whiskey Trail for Europe now. It's basically, I call them our European bottling arm. So we put big pictures on the label. There was kind of a movement like with Whiskey Agency and a lot of the kind of German and European bottlers who do these fantastic pieces of artwork. And we've always reserved that for Whiskey Exchange. We do big kind of artwork things for Whiskey Exchange. And me and our designer, we kept keeping artwork because Sekinder wouldn't like it. And we had masses of amounts of artwork for labels that we weren't using. So one day while we were having a beer in town, we just went, you know what, we'll just start our own label and do it with Sekinder's money. We won't tell him, which we did. And he then told me he would never buy the whiskies. He would never stock them on the Whiskey Exchange. I'd have to sort it all out. And then we bought the first lot and went, no, they're really nice. I'll take all of those. We had lots of arguments about with customers. This is the most recent series, and it's a series of computer games. When you do see the labels, it's like 1980s retro computer games. And the only thing that let me down was my designer promised me that he was going to include on every computer game, but he did not do that. So it's not quite as fun as it should be. But we do stuff like car labels. Basically, the other thing I found about this, and I don't know if either of you have ever experienced this, I can't sell any of this whiskey in France because it's considered fun. Who knew? They're not allowed to have fun in France. I did not know that until I started trying to do it. It's terrible.
Certainly, we had last year we had to change Christmas Big Pete at the last minute because he was holding a bottle of whiskey, and the French said no, not allowed.
No,
so
it's too fun. I've always thought he looks like a really fun guy.
I didn't say that, but
Be good, Oliver. Be good. Stop insulting your customers.
or an entire nation.
No, I think whiskey think it's as mental as I do, to be completely honest. But yeah, anyway, so grain whiskey, it's one of the 2 grain whiskies in the setup. I'm really looking forward to trying to port Dundas, which is quite a bit younger. This one's 8 years old. It was part of a big parcel of whiskey that we bought from a broker on a bit of a gamble. I tried like half a dozen of the samples and I went, yeah, why not take the lot? We'll see what happens. And turned up with very low alcohols. So these were the slightly higher ones that we've managed to keep for a little bit.
That's lovely.
Yeah, I would say it's.
Yeah, very nice.
Yeah, I've done these in a slightly weird order, but old grain and young grain have very different character. You know, younger grain. It's not, 15 years is not necessarily young, but grain gets softer as it gets older. It gets sort of like, it's one of those ones where people for a long time didn't realize quite how good this stuff could be because nobody drank it.
Yeah.
So I'm really pleased with seeing more of them over the last decade that I've been knocking around the whiskey industry. Just, and the only problem is that people are realizing they're not quite so affordable as they once were.
Yeah, I remember 15 years ago or so when I was at Duncan Taylor bottling lots of old grain, and it just blew everyone away because there were buttons to buy. for like a 1965 or whatever. But the problem with good whiskey is we tell people, and then people find out about it, and then we don't have any left.
I think it's really comparable to, and often a lot better than like old bourbon. So you look at like the really high-end crazy bourbons at 100, 200 pound, and they're often too woody. And then you go to grain whiskey, and it's all delicate and pretty, and
there's not so much of the wood spice.
For me, it's our answer to dessert wine. I mean, I love, it's a fairly consistent style you get of the, unless it's been finished in a sherry, but generally it's got that wonderful vanilla, coconut, candy, butterscotch sweetness. I think it's phenomenal and perfect at the end of a meal.
Yeah,
definitely that dessert wine. I'm trying to work out if it's an estery zing or whatever. There's a certain thing, that fruitiness you get in dessert wines, which has definitely got that sort of similarity in this style of whiskey. Yeah.
As well, I guess you've got that in this, at least you've got that balance between quite light. It's quite a light whiskey, and you do have certain floral notes in it. But texture-wise, it's quite dense because obviously it's 28, 29 years old, 30 years old, and that ends up making it slightly thicker and richer, like the dessert wines.
One quick comment. Sekinder has popped up to let everybody know that he is watching, and also there is a comment in the backstage from about 15 minutes ago which just says, "Are you talking about me yet?" So he is aware of what is potentially going on, Oliver. So, so with that, should we move on to our next whiskies? Speaking of grain whiskies, going on to something a little bit different, another closed distillery. But Cara, if you want to tell us all about your Port Dundas 2004 is the next whiskey we're moving on to. Come on, focus. There we go.
So I have the original bottle in front of me. As a family, we're huge grain fans. Fred and I both have, unfortunately, very sweet teeth. So have always thoroughly enjoyed grains and always been disappointed by how undervalued and underrated they are by the whiskey enthusiast community out there. But it's definitely changing. For us, this is probably as young as we would go in terms of releasing a grain. I'm with Ollie that typically for us they're sort of 25, 30 years plus, but this one we finished for a decent period of time in an XPX butt, so really quite different from the bourbon vanilla sort of sawdust style that we had before. For me, with this one, you'll get far more, or for me anyway, I get far more of a mocha, chocolatey, boozy raisin style coming through. As we'll hear lots of, it's without colouring, so that's totally natural and without chill filtration. We have brought the strength down by quite a bit. Again, the wonderful thing about grain is it holds its strength phenomenally well, but this one's bottled at 48.4% strength. I too will have a sip. Yeah, to me, it's got that lovely chewy toffee style, really creamy, lots of brown sugar, a bit of vanilla in there as well, but just that slight sherry heritage coming through as well.
I'd say, Cara, that for me is rum and raisin ice cream. I can actually tell you, I'm in Cornwall currently eating rum and raisin ice cream.
Bang on. Mm-hmm. And so different from what we just had from you guys.
Again, just shows, again, the distilleries are quite different anyway, but again, it's just how you play around with casks and how you leave it and when you grab it at which stage in its development. It's, this is, for me, it's like liquefied crunchy bars. You're saying about the rum and raisin, but it's got that sort of like cinder toffee thing in there. It's a little bit of something pleasantly burnt in there as well.
Yeah, the burnt sugar and the molasses style coming through, definitely.
Mm.
I really like that. It just got such a nice mouthfeel as well. It feels really thick and chewy.
And this is the thing about this. You're saying about how you've dropped it down in strength quite a lot. The first two whiskeys we had were up in the 50s. This is down at 48.4. And I know Ollie and I have discussed this at great length in the past about choosing the strength of a whiskey is not necessarily just, here, have a cask strength. That's great. People can play with it themselves. But choosing the strength of a whiskey and knocking it down can reveal things you wouldn't necessarily see there anyway. And this is a classic example of that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say this is one Fred selected and it's his tasting notes, so I don't remember it, but I suspect when it came into us for trying, it would have been well into the 60s and probably, I mean, I love high strength whiskey, but at that level, I think it probably would have been too much. So, but it is a fine balancing act because when you get to try the samples straight from the cask at sort of 64, 65% strength, it's a very different style from what it tastes like when we eventually bottle it at a slightly lower strength.
Yeah, and
But
again,
that for me is still nice and punchy.
that's the thing. It's really intense. You know, the canvas has sort of softened a bit over the years. This has got a proper intensity to it. And I was just thinking, if I had this any stronger, that might go too far. You might get into that spirity zone. It might become too much. And that, you know, dropping it back with water really just creates the whiskey in a way. So I've got a few questions. The first one is someone's asking what we're drinking. So I'll go on to the next three when we actually try them. But the first three we've had a What Whiskey Malachmore 2008. We've had a Elixir Distillers Canvas 1990. And the one we're having just now, especially for you, Jason, is the Port Dundas. Okay, focus. Port Dundas 2004, 15 years old, which, Cara, you were saying, was it a PX cast you said that they've been finished in?
Yes, yep.
So properly adding that real punch of something a little bit
spicy
and rich behind.
I think the balance of the PX finish, it's not like with PX, it's quite easy to ruin things by just leaving it in too long. And you're still getting the Port Dundas style coming through, and that's for me perfect.
And again, that's such a fine balance because I know there are the people out there who absolutely adore the sherry bombs, and from time to time I love a heavily sherried whiskey, but it gets to the ridiculous stage where you lose the essence of what the distillery created. So it's, hopefully we have struck a balance and left a decent cask that we can finish something else in.
I think it's perfect.
It feels really integrated as well, and I think that's the other problem with finishing is you have that balance. Sometimes you take it out too soon and it ends up being a layer on top of whiskey, and suddenly it's not integrated. Doesn't feels like you're drinking two things. Whereas this feels really integrated. So I really like that. I could drink an awful lot of that very quickly without thinking.
Oh, there. But no, again, you talk about grain whiskies. You know, there's not so many grain whiskey distilleries open these days. You know, we have two here. You know, Canvas and Port Dundas. Port Dundas was the first grain whiskey I ever tried. I think Gavin Love is popping up in the chat. I was at a tasting that he was at where we had to do a blending session, and I ended up making my blend, which was a bottle to take home of Port Dundas. I didn't necessarily really buy into the whole blending thing. I think I put a drop of Klein-Leach in the top just so I could tick a box. But again, it's that whole
thing. John.
Really, grain whiskey is often seen as a type of whiskey which doesn't have character and doesn't, it's just like, oh yeah, it's a canvas to do other things with. But they do have their different characters, and different distilleries do different things. So I'm a bit of a grain whiskey fan, and I haven't had a chance to talk about it for a while. But later on this week, I will be doing a grain whiskey session. Anyway, check out the schedule because I don't know when it is because I haven't written it down on a piece of paper yet. So anyway, any more thoughts on the Port Dundas or the Canvas before we move on?
Just excellent example of a good grain. So
yeah,
just drink more grain. If you want to
drink more grain.
Yeah. Yep.
It's as Gavin says in the chat. Grain is great, but we need to stop telling people about it. He was one of the people who told everybody at the SMWS in London how great grain was, along with Phil Storey, who's inevitably somewhere popping around. Those two have introduced more people to grain whiskey than. It's very upsetting. It's all expensive.
Yeah. I mean, Gavin,
I've always found if you've got a grain whiskey on your stand, quite at a physical show, people will try it, love it, and go and tell their friends about it. You know, they're like, "Oh, you need to go and try that. You need to go to, the Dougie Laing stand and try the Port and Das, or you need to go and try the Invergordon over there, or whatever." And it tends to be the ones that sparks people's excitement and enjoyment. They're like, "Oh, this is new. You must go and try that." Whereas, some other really good whiskies, people just take for granted that they're really good whiskies and don't really make a fuss of them, whereas people get surprised and keep coming back for grain, which is always good. If I have grain, I always try and have it on a tasting or in a, on our stand. And, people always try and, it's the same with blended whiskey. People always try and shoehorn the blend or the grain to the start of the tasting. They're like, put that first because it's not, we'll get that out the way. And, it can sing on its own. It can stand up later on in a tasting perfectly well. So,
yeah. I say the only reason why it's pushed to the beginning here is because we start getting a little bit heavier from now on. So anyway, and on that, thank you very much, Jason, for telling me that it's October the 7th at 5:30 p.m. is my Grain is Great session, which I'll now write on my piece of paper so I don't forget. So anyway, shall we move on to another whiskey? I think so. Mark, we're going to move on to you now. And speaking of blends, of a sort.
Speaking of blend.
Yeah. So we're going to look at Mark's blended malt 2001. And I'm trying to read backwards because my camera is backwards. I think that says 16, but it could be 19. Oh, it's 19 years old.
19 years old.
That's maths.
44.9%.
Excellent.
Yeah, I would love to be able to tell you, I am the company's master blender, blah, 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 and all that nonsense. I didn't blend this. It was bought blended. And it's really good, so we bottled it. Simple as that. Ollie does say that allegedly this is a hard job. It's not. Got a sample of it. I've no idea.
He's listening, Mark. Shut up.
Yeah, he's always listening. But it's. I'd love to tell you that I have done blending in the past or whatever, which is probably more scary than bottling a single cask. Bottling a single cask is simple. You just go, I like that. Bottle it. Whereas, putting blends together is quite something. All I do know about this is that it's ex-Edrington stock. So make of that what you will. Single sherry butt. It's obviously been vatted together for quite a while. And when it was vatted together, the strength was probably taken down. Hence why this is bottled at 44.9. But it's good. Means
very good
whiskey, but not over the top. You get lots of, little bits of spices and things coming through, but there's no sulfur or anything. And I could just drink this all day. And again, delighted that it was a butt, quite full, 630 bottles. I know I've got 10 cases next door. I know that because I carried them up the stairs last night. And yeah, I just think it's great. And people who look down their noses at blends, don't deserve to drink whiskey, in my opinion. This is just stunning.
Do you know which region it's from, Mark?
I say all I know is that it's ex-Edrington stock, so it's probably got some of that stuff that I used to live at in it, but I don't know for certain. And that's a great thing. Sometimes you don't know. It would be brilliant to have have full information and everything, but a lot of the time you don't. We just know that it's a blended malt, so there's no grain in it. Blended malt, and it's ex-Edrington. So.
You're so right. I mean, the half of our business is blended malts, half is single cask, single malt generally. And I know which side's the easy, but we do our own blending, but it's amazing how people just see the word blended and they're immediately turned off without even trying it. But there's far more skill and art involved in creating something like that than there is in trying a whiskey, going, that seems good, bottling it, or trying a whiskey thinking it's not quite right and putting it in a different cask.
I take my hat off to, if I ever wore a hat, I hardly wear a jumper, never mind a hat. I take my hat off to proper blenders because, I've done blending in the past and some of them have been really good, if I do say so myself. But I've never had to blend something to be consistent. I went, let's put that and that together. Oh, that's really nice. And then go and create something else. I've never had to go, right, go and create that again. And, the skill of doing something like that is just phenomenal. And it's, well above my level of ability. But sometimes, in the future, what whiskey we may play around and do our own blends at the minute. one of the things though I've always had when I've been doing blends, I would always have all the components I would happily bottle on its own. And at the minute, you know, am I, you know, being honest, am I going to take the financial risk of vatting 3-4 casks together and reducing the sellability of 4 good casks? You know, once we're a bit more established and I've got more room to play, then we can have fun and do things. But at the minute, if we get a sample like this, you're not going to turn this down. It's
No, it's excellent. It's so good.
Again, this reminds me of it. There's been a variety of these Edgington stock things going around at various different ages. But the thing that always sort of gets for me is this very specific style of sort of sherry casting where it's just this very, very elegant. It's this polished wood in there, and it doesn't have that massive punch of sort of stickiness of sherry. It just shows a much more, as I say, elegance is the way I would put it.
I do get that kind of long, lingering, polished woods. You know. But I do know what you mean. It's Cara alluded to earlier. You know, I grew up at Macallan. I love big sherry cask whiskies, but sometimes you don't want it's just like peat. Sometimes you want a big smack of peat, and that's brilliant. Sometimes you want a big smack of sherry. But this, I like it when it adds to it. You know, like the Port Dundas there, the sherry is added to it, but it's not overpowered it. And I think it's, for me, it's. And everything I do, it's all about trying to get the balance right. You know, you want the wood to add something to it, but not overpower it. You know, sometimes you drink sherry cask whiskies that are really good, but they're just sherry. And it could be a Manachimore, it could be a Dalyun, it could be whatever, but you don't get the distillery DNA coming through. So, although Sam, having said that, we've no idea which whiskies went into this, so I couldn't tell you what the DNA is, but it's good, and that's the main thing. Sometimes people get too hooked up on what's in it, what's this, what colour was distilled in the box when it was distilled. You know, drink it, like it, love it, have another one.
And actually, if you didn't have to put the word blended malt Scotch whisky on it, I guarantee you get a lot more people immediately loving it rather than having to do the tough sell of it's a blended malt, there's no grain in there, it's not a blended Scotch. But it's the big challenge of that category.
That's why it's always nice to do 4 things blind to people. You know, I mean, because a lot of people do drink with their eyes. I'm not saying you should because it hurts, but you know, people look at the colour and go, "Oh, I want that," and then you go, "Well, it's actually a blend, or it's a blended malt, or whatever, or you know, it's a grain whiskey." You know, "Oh, I don't like that." You know, particularly with blends, you get people going, "Oh, I'm a malt drinker. I'm a member of a whiskey club, don't you?" You know, so get out my tasting. You know, I remember once I was in Denmark doing a tasting for about 300 people, and one of the next whiskies we were about to do was a grain whiskey, and this guy said to his mate, "Oh, I don't like grain whiskey." So I said to him, you know, in front of 300 people, "Oh, you don't like grain whiskey? Which ones have you tried?" And he was like, "I've never tried any." So I made him stand up in front of 300 people and repeat that, and he left with a case of it. So that was quite good going into getting sales. But yeah, it's, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether it's from, you know, a well-known distillery, a big distillery, it's a blend or it's a blended malt. As long as it's good, that's the main thing. You know?
Yeah.
Isn't that the best thing about being an independent bottler? I mean, you essentially, and I've joked about this before. There was always that thing going around from. Oh, you probably remember this first from Morrison Bowmore, that independent bottlers are the barnacle on the bottom of the boat and whatnot.
Parasite, I think, was the word they used.
Yeah, parasite, and in some ways that's absolutely true, because like this was probably made for a purpose. It was made to go into almost certainly Asia at some point. Market that didn't materialize, and then they sold it off. But the great thing about being an independent bottler is you don't have to think about what, so you just have to think it tastes nice, and can I sell that if it tastes nice? You know, yeah, I could go out and tell people it's really good, and that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah,
you can be finding.
I always think, you know, when you're picking a cask, you go, would I stand up in front of 100 people and drink this?
Yeah.
And if the answer is no, then you don't do it. Simple.
When again, I think it's the wonderful thing about independent bottlers. We're all personally invested and very involved in these businesses. Would you put your name to everything you release? And I mean, at Douglas Laing, only as control freak as it sounds, only family members sign off the tasting notes and every cask sample, because you have to make sure that what goes out you believe is good. I mean, inevitably other people will have different opinions, but you have to believe in the quality of your product, whether it's a blended malt or a single malt or a single grain.
And I think that's one of the keys with independent bottlers. Is Douglas Laing, you've probably got quite a lot of staff in them, but it's still family control. And people know that, that it's not huge multinational companies where there's someone making a decision there and everyone else has to, follow, and it doesn't really matter. I think people buy into the hands-onness of it's yourself, Cara, it's Ollie, it's, myself and Kate. That people can get in touch with the people that are actually doing the hands-on work, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Hand tasting. Okay. Hand tasting.
Yeah, hand tasting.
Hand tasting.
Hand tasting. Yeah, hand selected mic. Oh, don't get me started. Hand selected.
We've already had comments about hand selecting your cask, Mark. I have deliberately ignored them just in case. So I'm sorry. First thing, I forgot to say how much the put Dundas was. John Webb, who's knocking around, someone was asking. The Dundas is 66.95, I think. It's about 66, 67 quid. Mark, how much are you doing this blended malt for? He says, asking me, realizing yet again that you don't know.
In the town, it's about 80 quid.
About 80 quid, yeah. Which is eminently reasonable. And I've been trying to work out which of your whiskies I was going to buy. I waiting for them to turn up. They've arrived today at the Whisky Exchange, and this is on the list now. So that is very much a whiskey that.
Excellent. At least I've got one sale. That'll pay the mortgage.
I'm here to help, man. I'm here to help. So, anyway, so probably should move on to another whiskey. But I'll just say, if anybody's got any questions, make sure you pop them in the thing. There might even be somewhere a ask to share audio and video thing, which I might entirely ignore if you do it. But at the same time, if you want to ask a question, you might even be able to do so on camera. So I think that might even work. Who knows? But if you have questions, make sure you ask them down in the box. So, shall we move on to another whiskey? This is one of yours, I do believe, Oliver.
Yeah.
So we're moving on now to a 13-year-old Orkney malt.
It's a single malt from Orkney. No one could guess which one. I mean, it's really tough. I imagine both Mark and Cara will remember the stock when it came around a few years ago. There was a big offer out on through the market and of a single malt from Orkney unnamed. The vintages. It was also available from certain vintages when Scapa was closed, which shrunk down your options a little bit more. So we're obviously not allowed to say that it's Highland Park, but it's Highland Park. This is bottled in our reserve cask range, is where we put together casks into small batches. We did that essentially because we've been selling single casks in Scotland for quite a few years. And the biggest problem with single casks is they sell out really quickly, and then you face really angry customers telling you how come I didn't get a case, and it just goes on and on. And plus, you turn up at shows, you bring it for people, and they're like, "How much is it?" You tell them to shop again. No, it's none of that. I can't have that. So we decided we'd kind of extend a bit and do batches. Plus, it's a bit of fun mixing stuff together. Playing around, pretending to blend. I still don't think we do it properly. We're just putting stuff in the glass and going like this. Just more things into the glass. There's no real difference to selecting a single glass from what you can see. When you get to Chivas and Edrington and blends like Johnny Walker, they're insane. When they're using thousands of litres in different styles to keep, and as I said, that consistency, it's incredible. These are small batches. They're kind of essentially between 3 and 10 casks at a time. This particular stock is kind of interesting. So on the label, also put the Angel's share. So we say how much loss within the cask. We did that because it's on a label in Japan that Sukinda loved, and it had all this detail, and it's like, we should do that, which I said was a great idea until I figured out how annoying it was to do it when it comes to the practical bottling something. But we've done it anyway. And when this comes out in about a month's time, you'll see the angel share is very low. That was another oddity of regulation that I did not know until we did it. So when we bought this whiskey, we bought it in tanks. It came up in it was in a tanker, and then they said, we'll put it into wood for you and sell you X many thousand litres. Great. I provided the wood, so we actually re this into sherry hogsheads. No, sherry butts. And what I didn't know at the time, being very inexperienced, was when you do that, the AYS, so the date at which they start telling you the angel share, that's the date it was put in the cask. That's sometime in early 2018. So the first time we did a bottling of Orkney, it came out with an angel share of 6%. And I was like, after 12 years, it's only lost 6%. That sounds amazing. Obviously, that's not the case. After about 2 years, it lost 6%, which thereabouts makes sense. So this is 13 years older. It's out, I said, next month. From memory, we used three sherry butts. And it's, I hope, integrates the sherry with the whiskey well enough. I hope you still get some of the smoke. We've used casks. In this case, we used casks from Miguel Martin. He's incredibly well known in the whiskey industry. He produces an awful lot of wood, and I actually met him on a trip to Glenfarclas. So Glenfarclas buy a lot of wood from him, and he's a lovely guy, and the wood is incredibly consistent. We don't use it everything, but if I want a style, so if I want that kind of gingerbready, ginger cakey style, it delivers that really, really quite quickly and quite consistently. So from all the sherry casks, and we are messing around with lots of different suppliers and producers, what I have found is if I use Miguel, I know exactly what I'm getting. For some whiskies, it doesn't work as well as for others. So we'll use some spirits, not other spirits. But we do find when we have something that's quite a heavy spirit, quite a big spirit, it works quite well. I've talked about it. I've not even got a drink yet. It's terrible.
Yeah, I think. Wondering if it worked. I think it has worked, mate. I think you're all right there. Don't worry.
I don't know about Mark and Cara. Do you fret when bottles come out? I do. I open every single bottle we get, which makes me sound like a horrendous alcoholic. And each time, there's a sense of dread that it's going to be a disaster. Because I've had so many experiences that when you get the sample from the cask, and Cara, you alluded to this earlier, once you've messed around with it with water, also once it's been moved in the lorry, I remember we bottled the cask at Klein Leash once, and it came in the sample one colour, and it came out in the bottle a completely different one. I always get to the point of the bottle, and I open the first bottle, and I'm like, I'm worried it's going to be a disaster. 9 times out of 10, it's actually better than the samples, but there's always that fear.
It's exactly the reason. Sorry, no, on you go, Mark. No, it's exactly the reason we're starting our own bottling facility, because you're at the mercy of others. We tend to have more packaging disasters than spirit disasters, but I totally share that sentiment of the fear of the line sample arriving in and having no idea, because you're not master of your own destiny at that point. You're relying on someone else to reduce the strength or bottle the right cask. Yeah,
and I imagine we've all three of us have had experiences. I'm doing a class on this later. Experiences where things are very wrong in very dramatic circumstances. Where I remember when Ardbeg did that whole, we accidentally married some young whiskey with some old whiskey, and everyone went, well, that's obviously a marketing reason. Now I look at that and I go, no, that probably happened. That almost certainly happened. I've had 3 times.
We had 1968 Glenrothes mixed with 8-year-old Tamdhu.
I've had 5-year-old Bunnahabhain married with a 3-year-old blend.
That was the result.
Oh, I know what you mean. Whenever we get a new bottling in a whiskey exchange bottle, or once exclusive to us or whatever, unfortunately, I can't show you the one I've just got here, which I was drinking earlier on because it only just arrived, and I'm not to tell anybody that it exists yet. But the first thing we did was we got a bottle in front of Sukhinder. It was just every single time we get one in, you just want to make sure it's definitely right. And yeah, it is. We're bottling on a much smaller scale. Even no matter how big an independent bottler you are, you're bottling on a much smaller scale than the distillers, and it's just a little bit of worry. So, quick random question. Oh, sorry, Mark.
It is a worry. It is a worry. I've been quite lucky with our stuff this time that it's been bottled fairly quickly after I've selected it. But I know in the past, like, people will come up to you and go, "Oh, what do you think about this latest release?" And I was like, "Well, I picked it 6 months ago or 8 months ago. I can't quite remember." And there's quite a time period at times. It's not like you're going, "Oh, that's good," and it gets bottled tomorrow. There is that kind of time delay, particularly if you've got things in finishing casks or whatever as well. But it's always nice to hear Ollie break the romance of the industry, talking about buying things in tankers and containers and things like that.
I can't help it.
He's going to ruin the romance, and then I'll just do it even more.
Cara, I'm sorry. It's all Fred's fault, because I had this dream, right, that when I'd get into independent bottling, I'd be wandering around beautiful warehouses, which I've done at the market. It's great fun, and we fell over a lot. But I remember the first time actually doing that, wandering around a warehouse to select casks. And you know what I found? It's really cold in Pitlochry in February.
Yeah.
Like really, really cold. So you can't taste it. Your feet hurt. And then I was pulling all these samples, and Sukhinder said, "No, we take them all home. We try them in the office. We're not going to try it. There's no point in us selecting here. It's a waste of time." And then you sit in our case, I sit in a little white room with a spreadsheet. That is my day-to-day life. Well, my day-to-day life is sitting in my house, but it's same thing.
And you're right. I guess for me, it's still, having been at the likes of Morrison, Bowmore and White Mackay, to me it's still quite romantic, the independent bottler world, because it's generally it's not tankers and IBCs, and so I'm living in the Fred bubble, clearly.
I think what I did discover was I discovered a whole different type of romance to it, because I think one that the smaller side, so finding individual casks, what I discovered more than anything is that you take from everywhere, you learn from everyone. Independent bottlers, by and large, are all friends, which is a really, like the whiskey industry generally, everyone's very close, everyone chats, which is great. But independent bottlers, every time I go to shows or events, I share drams with people who do the same job as me, and there's something really lovely about that. And then you can notes about the stock that I can't imagine you would do if you were a big distiller. And I think in some ways you end up closer to the liquids than maybe a distiller does, because you're looking at everybody's stuff all the time. So you're encouraged. I mean, I've always been encouraged to go and try. I used to get, for example, all of the Douglas Laing samples in. I was doing a lot of work for Whisky Exchange in terms of cask buying, and this is quite a few years ago, and I've moved away from that a bit more now. But I used to try all of your stuff, because the Kindle always used to say to me, "You can never say what your bottle is good unless you know what everyone else is doing. Unless you know how good is, you're just making it up." And I think there's something wonderful about that. So I still buy. I spend my entire non-work buying independent bottle stock from other people. Partly because I'm a bit obsessive, and partly because I love seeing other people's styles. And I think in some ways what I've discovered more and more is that an independent bottling is a reflection of the people who are doing it. It's a reflection of you, Cara, and Fred, and it's a reflection of you, Mark. And I can taste, this sounds awful, I can taste Mark Walker in his whiskies. I can feel the sweat.
Clearly, I know what you mean.
I always used to say, my best example is Doug McIver from Berries. I could tell you a Dougie bottling miles away. I could literally, it's all about texture. I can try it. It's got a specific texture. It's his whiskey. I can feel it. He loves a specific style, and I think that's where my romance for independent bottling actually is today. It's not the wandering around warehouses, finding a little cask and thinking that's amazing. It's the people and understanding what they love, understanding their palate. That's what makes it really special.
Yeah, and then that's you making an excuse for destroying the romance in every tasting. So that's all right. So now it's one of these ones. Whenever you look into things that you love, you always find sort of like, you lose some of the romance, but at the same time, you always find other things which are still there. So anyway, we're running out of time. We've got a load of questions as well, so I want to get onto our next whiskey so we can have a chat about that, and then jump on to. Don't worry, Colin. I'm not entirely ignoring you. I'm just slightly ignoring you. I'll get onto your questions in a moment. So anyway, Cara, do you want to tell us about our last whiskey of the night?
And aware of time, so I will make it rapid. The nice thing about our bottles is they contain, I think it was once counted, they contain about 24 different bits of information. So this one is a Talisker 9-year-old, distilled in November 2010, bottled in November of last year. It spent its life in a refill hogshead, so it does look like white wine. And we say that unapologetically. We don't add any caramel colouring, so it's totally natural. Bottled at 48.4% strength. And for me, this is one where ideally you'd take your sample and you'd drink it on your nearest beach. It's got that wonderful bonfire, burnt wood, slightly citric, seaweedy, oceanic style. For me, it's just archetypal Talisker, and I do enjoy a Talisker, their own bottling and independent bottlers. It's definitely got that taste of the sea, salty tang, charred oak, very maritime. Great in your house, even better if you can get it along to your local beach.
And that really is, Talisker is this proper sort of seaside jam, has that big briny character to it, and it's one of those whiskies you just don't see very often from independent bottlers because they don't let many casks of it out.
Cara's got it all.
Yeah, I was going to say only Douglas Laing. Really.
I can't say anything.
What do you know about them that we don't? I mean, you've completely got like.
I can't say we've got enough of it. I'd love to have a bit more Talisker, but we're lucky that, again, back to the earlier point made of, it frustrates me massively that independent bottlers are seen as the wart in the whiskey industry, and we just get the dregs that the distillers don't want, because it's categorically untrue. We're fortunate that a lot of the distillers who back in 1948 my grandpa set up distilling agreements with on a handshake still stand today, and some of the distilleries within the portfolio where Talisker comes from is where we had filling contracts agreed back in the 40s, early 50s, and it's again the wonderful thing about the whiskey industry, they still stand even though there's no paperwork to accompany them. But Talisker's a phenomenal malt, and it's one we use a bit in our Rock Island blended malt. So again, we've got that tough call to make because we know we could put it into Old Particular or into Provenance, but we do leave a bit of it behind for Rock Island and try and strike that commercial balance.
So lovely.
Yeah. So what do we think of this one then, guys? As I say, I've got a question from Peter in the chat saying, is it salty? And this is not as sort of like, briny as some Talisker have had. It's got that pepperiness to it. But it just has that sort of hint of the sea. So
it's got a little bit of that kind of almost like lime and chili pepper. I'm fully on a kind of agave thing here going off.
Yeah.
I feel myself having a really good time. I'm going to be happy, basically. That's where this ends up. There's lots of music and lots of lime, lots of fun.
This is a Serge Valentin from Whiskey Fun Dram. This is one of his going on about tequila and mezcal. This is the sort of stuff he talks about there. And that, again, tequila and mezcal, talking about whiskey as being tequila and mezcal. That's not an insult to whiskey or an insult to tequila and mezcal.
No.
It's that bright
compliment to mezcal
style. Yeah.
And this is young. I mean, it's only 9 years old, so we're not kidding anyone. But again, for me, with this style of whiskey, actually a young age makes it that bit more impactful and fiery and in your face, which, you know, a Talisker at 15, 16 is not going to have that same depth and charred oak, seaweedy style that for me this does.
It's obviously all distillate led, Cara, right? I mean, this is Talisker at its pure, and that's also something wonderful. There's nothing messed about with, and the spirit is really
yeah.
Something that I know.
I probably will take a drop of this to the beach on my way home.
Perfect.
If I can get away with it. Well, actually, no, I won't, because it's illegal to drink in the streets in Campbelltown. So
do it at dark.
Yeah. But Ollie, you were saying about this being spirit led. This is one of the things I know from all three of you about your approaches to whiskey. While you do go occasionally for these big casts and things, there's always an appreciation of where the spirit comes from and making sure you don't lose that spirit character. Apart from when you do, because obviously there's occasions where you'll do silly things with casks and, swamp a whiskey and you'll taste just cask. But that is Talisker, and it tastes like Talisker. And all the whiskies we've tried tonight taste like where they come from. Even the one where we don't know where it comes from, it tastes a bit like where you think it might come from. So, I always describe it as, I used to love massive sherry casks when I started work at the Whiskey Exchange. However, Sekinda very much like whiskies that talk about the distillery they're from. And now, 10 years later, Stockholm Syndrome is in full effect, and I now like that style of whiskey. But it's one of those ones that you learn to appreciate. You learn these different things. You see these different sides of whiskey, and that's one of the things I love about independent bottlers is you see these things from these distilleries you wouldn't do otherwise.
I think, as you say, Billy, though, wood's great. You can use wood to enhance something or to make it more palatable, make it more enjoyable. But the thing about whiskey is it's all about the people at the end of the day. It's about the people who are making it. And there's nothing more true than there's a conversation on whiskey terroir, which I will not get into because I'd be here far too long. The thing about terroir that is actually with me is people. The people make whiskey. And as an independent bottler, you can properly celebrate that. You can celebrate the fact that every distillery is properly different and show that as different as it is. And I think that's probably wonderful. And this whiskey is such a great example of that.
Yeah, very much so. No, it's again, I'm just going back, sort of like nosing and taking, trying them again. And, we've got 6 whiskies, they're into little groups of things. The Talisker and the Malachmore are slightly separate. We've got a couple of the Orkney malt and the blended malt. We've got some sort of ideas and the grains, again, similar sort of ideas. But they're all very, very different. And again, this is one of the glorious things of when you're an independent bottler, you don't have to go down a specific style, specific path. You can look across that whole thing. As you say, you can celebrate the individual distilleries. And with 6 whiskies tonight from 3 different companies, but 6 very, very different whiskies still, which is great.
I think that's one of the things I love about independent bottlers and doing things like this. We've 3 different companies. Technically, we're all competitors, but we all get on, and there's room for us all. In the industry. Well, hopefully there's room for us all. Just one.
Well, as long as we kick all the distillery bottlings off the shelf, there's loads of room.
Yeah. But what I mean by that is, people who are drinking independent bottlings, and I always say this, are the worst customers in the world, but they're the best customers. They're our customers. But what I mean, before I get shot, is people that drink our stuff, they'll drink from mine. They'll drink some Dougie Laing, then they'll some Ollie's, then they'll go and drink some Springbank, some Highland Park, then they'll drink some more Dougie Laing. You don't have people that are, they only drink malt whiskey, or they only drink Ollie stuff, or they only drink Dougie Laing. They may prefer more of Dougie Laing than some other independent bottlers, whatever. But people are always looking for new things, and that's why I think the independent scene is actually quite nice. I'll quite happily, if I'm on the stand, tell people to go to the Dougie Laing stand and try something, or go to Ollie's stand or whatever. And I think that kind of sums up like how friendly it all is, and how there is a need for different things. And technically, we're all bottling similar ideas, similar philosophies, but you're always getting something different, and that's the fun of it.
I mean, luckily for us, Mark, they all drink all of that whiskey in one night, so it's pretty much endless at this point.
Yeah.
And it should be fun. I think that's the other side of independent bottlers, that we're not a stuffy distiller. We don't have certain ways we have to behave. We recognise that whiskey is enjoyable and should be fun, and let's not take ourselves too seriously and just enjoy drinking good quality whiskey, whether it's blended or grain or single cask, single malt. Just if it's good quality, enjoy it and have a bit of fun in the process.
I think if you have to be too serious and you have to, you're trying too hard, then your whiskey's not good.
Yeah.
No comment.
We had a few comments of like, great whiskey, great chat, a great way of spending your last hour at work. Thank you very much, Duncan, for joining us from your hard working life. So, got some very, very geeky questions from Colin, but I'll just drop in one quickly now because we've got like under 5 minutes left. So Colin was asking about when you bottle stuff, do you lose much when you're bottling it? Do you lose? Is there liquid lost in the process?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was about to say. Yeah.
Depends. I think the answer is depends how anal you're going to be with your bottler about them losing liquid. I once made everything for a coffee strainer to make sure it didn't lose very much, and then we watched them do it. But most of the time, yeah, we lose lots of liquid.
It's the challenge of having others bottle your product. We had a cracker last year, and not in a good way, where a bottler drove a forklift truck into a Port Ellen cask and we lost it all. And that was properly heartbreaking. That was a emergency meeting called, but you're at the mercy of others, and definitely you lose a lot. And you lose a lot every time you re-rack a cask as well. But if the quality's not there and you need to finish it in something to get the quality up, you've got to take that hit.
I think Ollie knows all about warehouse losses from a certain cask of Ardbeg he used to have.
I had some interesting ones. I had an Ardbeg that lost an awful lot of liquid in Campbelltown, which I may have been walking around a warehouse while someone said to me, there used to be a cask of Ardbeg here. It was really good. I don't know where it's gone. And I'm thinking, I just moved it to the bottling pool and it lost a lot of liquid. I wonder who drank that. I also, my all-time favourite letter from a warehouse was, sorry that your cask was found when we went to move it. And they gave a reason. The reason was there were no hoops. And you ask yourself, how were the wood holding together in the warehouse without the hoops? My favourite reason for loss of liquid is no hoops. No. Vanished. As you say, Cara, there's a lot of trust involved. And then you go back and you ask the warehouse and they say to you, in our case, we looked at all your stock holding. It doesn't represent more than 2% loss. So sorry, we can't help you. It's natural loss.
Yeah.
That was actually my first discovery, that natural loss includes stuff like no hoops and people drinking your and people dropping your cask off the back of a lorry, and you start having to figure that in. And Billy knows our journey, so we've gone from a family business of two husbands and their wives owning a few casks to owning a lot of casks. And at the start, you lose one cask, that's a lot of liquid. That's a big percentage of your income.
Yeah.
Even at our scale now, it still feels like a lot of liquid, even though you now can't have the arguments because they're like, well, it's not. It feels like a lot. So.
But yeah, I mean, if we lose 10% on a cask, that affects our bottom line quite a lot. At the minute, so hopefully, but you don't want to be adding on 10% in the case that you might lose 10%. It's
no,
yeah, or we'll add in the forklift driver tax, on every bottling just in case. Yeah,
Well,
It
might be an idea there. But,
I remember doing this is definitely my last story because if Sekinda's listening, he'll kill me. I remember doing recasking on some Japanese whiskey, some very Japanese whiskey, and we had a new guy helping us. I went up to watch the new guy helping us, and they were pumping out the casks, and they were moving them over. And he pulled the pump out too soon, and I'm sitting there, and I got soaked. And he looked at me and he went, "Is that expensive?" All I can tell you is it was very old Japanese whiskey beginning with a K, and I didn't quite know how to explain to him what expensive meant at that point. Because also it was his very first week, and I didn't, what do you say to someone? I'm really sorry, your first week, you spent, 10 grand through pillows.
I had that one, but not quite so expensive. I was working at Macallan in the bottling hall, in the filling store, and I got a bit cocky and I had 3 hoses on at the same time, and one came out and I got absolutely soaked in New Make Macallan. I then had to go to work at the Craig Hotel, and I was just reeking of New Make. When I was driving to work that day, I was so hoping the police would pull me over, just so they'd be like, "Are you drinking, sir?" "No." "Well, you're reeking," and then just blowing into the bag and getting nothing. They didn't.
Oh, no. Well, I'm afraid, guys, we're going to have to wrap up because we are running out of time. Thank you very much for coming along. Yeah, thank you very much for joining me, and thank you very much for bottling such great whiskies. And so, yeah, Mark, we're really honoured to have a chance to sort of like finally try your whiskies. Having heard so much about your t-shirt company over the past year. So excellent t-shirt. I thoroughly recommend them. I'm not wearing one today. I normally attempt to try and subtly advertise the t-shirt company when I can. But yeah, Cara, Ollie, thank you very much for again just showing such different sort of whiskies, and keep bottling things, keep letting us drink them, and hopefully I should see you all soon.
All right, great stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers. All.